different perspectives. Very interesting, very stimulating, very insightful, and thought-provoking. Dr. Ines Calamar, the UN Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary or Arbitrary Executions, who is in any case is here in an official capacity, set the tone of the forum. Towards the end of her speech, she said it succinctly: there are other ways, better ways, other options and better options in dealing with the drug problem. In context, she took note of the fact that a UN special session of heads of states and government last year have committed not to do the war on drugs. Rather, they committed to a balanced, multifaceted, multidisciplinary approach, placing great emphasis on health, rights, and justice. Because according to the states, there are other ways, better ways, evidence-based, scientific ways of combating drug abuse and trafficking. On a personal reflection, she said that we are living in a world of intense disruption. There is the attacks on universal, indivisible rights, the undermining of equality, dignity, and accountability, and this rejection of human rights is predicated on the rejection of our common humanity. Dr. Calamar stressed that, and I quote, "One cannot deny the humanity of some people without losing humanity for all people." This ties up with Dr. Collins' presentation, where he pointed out that as regards global policy intervention, the call then of the UNGASS in 1998 was a drug-free world. But having clearly failed in this respect, in 2012 to 2014, the debate broke open and now all options are on the table, including the legalization of marijuana. On this point, Dr. Collins essentially argued that the return on investments is nil as regards supply intervention, that prohibition does not apply to producer and transit countries, so that what policy should states move towards? He laid out the expert recommendations. 1, prioritize development, not drug control goals. Expand public health, increase harm reduction, and number 3, apply harm reduction to side supply, such as management of illicit markets and shifting from market eradication, and utilize conventions, flexibilities, such as conforming to strict health and human rights principles. In dealing with the drug problem, Dr. Hart gave yet another interesting perspective on the drug problem. That is the public health approach. He noted that people tend to conflate drug use with drug abuse. Most people who use drugs do not abuse. It is only the drug abusers, and they need help. On that respect, what is needed is a health approach, but to be undertaken by qualified people, those who understand the health aspect of drugs. We cannot leave it to law enforcers. Moreover, he stressed that there is need to provide attractive alternatives. As you have seen that interesting rat experiment and also some experiments about people, where there is need to come up with attractive alternatives. Because with the addition of attractive alternatives, rats or even people veer away from drugs. And so the lesson to be learned is that there has to be attractive alternatives to drugs. On the Philippine side, what has the Philippine government done with the current drug situation? Dr. Benjamin cited global and Philippine data on the drug situation, as well as law enforcement data. A 2015 survey reveals that there are 1.8 million users, but it can go as high as 4 million based on intelligence report. Also, data on law enforcement noted that there are government approaches to the problem. So he pointed out that there are initiatives, as can be glimpsed, of course, on some of those suggestions. So some of the government responses to the problem includes the revision of the national anti-drug strategies to delineate role functions of government agencies in line with Republic Act 9165, review of laws, policies, the new Philippine anti-illegal drug strategy to be adopted through an executive order. In sum, the recurring note of yesterday's session is that there is need of a comprehensive approach to the drug problem. The war on drugs is only one approach, but there are other ways, better ways, evidence-based, scientific ways of combating drug abuse and trafficking. This morning, we hope to continue the great discussion we started yesterday and draw more lessons and perspectives on our next set of distinguished speakers as they share with us their insights on the experiences of Mexico, Thailand, and the Philippines in dealing with drug problems. Okay, so for our first speaker, we have with us Ms. Lisa Sanchez. She is a Latin American program manager based in the offices of Mexico Unido contra la Delincuencia in Mexico. Ms. Sanchez brings a genuinely international perspective on her organization, providing expert advice and experience on Latin American drug policy. She has continuously worked for a range of organizations, including the International AIDS Society and the Inter-American Drug Abuse Commission of the Organization of American States. She is also co-founder of the Drug Policy and Harm Reduction Program of Espolia, a youth-led organization based in Mexico City. She has a degree in International Relations from Tec de Monterrey and Sciences Po Paris, and a graduate degree in Political Science from the Sorbonne in France. Ms. Lisa Sanchez, may we give her a round of applause? Okay,
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure for me to be with you today, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't be in person. Good evening from Mexico City and good morning to you all. Really the objective of my presentation is just to give you an overview of what has happened in my country ever since 10 years ago. My president decided to declare a war on drugs, pretty much what it did was to militarize public security and therefore authorize a series of human rights violations in the name of fighting drug use and drug gangs that were pushing the drugs to the Mexican people. Whereas I understand that trying to deal with problematic drug use, it's a priority for all governments, and it's a priority for a public health oriented drug policy. The truth is that in Mexico, the use of these kinds of policies has not resulted in less problematic use or better public health results. Basically, and just to give you a very quick introduction to the policies that we have, Mexico had prohibited drugs ever since 1916. It's like over a century ago. And over the decades, the evolution of the juridical framework has just include more penalties, more criminal conducts, and pretty much the result has been a public policy now that has standardized the response to drugs. There are very different drugs depending on what people are using over time. That expanded the number of punishable conducts and increased the penalties that are assigned to each of these conducts, and that has disregarded scientific evidence for decades and reality, just trying to foster this institutional prejudice that drugs are inseparably connected to crime and drug consumption is always bad. The result of this particular policy is that we've been using the criminal justice system to fight a public health issue, and that we've been dismantling gradually the rule of law in my country, eroding the trust that people have on public institutions, and creating pretty much an exceptional system to deal with drugs, because we've had created this imaginary menace that drug criminals were taking over security in Mexico, when in reality they didn't, and now they have increased their firepower and their money power a lot. One of the main consequences of purely punitive approaches and the dismantling of all of these organizations through the use of the military and pretty much the authorization of exceptional methods, including extrajudicial killings, has been the increase in the number of criminal organizations operating throughout the national territory, throughout the country, and of course, increased violence that you see in every single media outlet when you hear about Mexico. So very briefly, our current policies or our current drug laws say that if you incur in all of the following activities, you will have penal sanctions that go from 10 months to 25 years in prison, depending if you are arrested in possession or if you're arrested and suspected of being transporting, commercing, supplying, producing, or cultivating illicit substances. There is just one differentiation in the legal system that was introduced very recently in 2009 that distinguishes small trafficking from large-scale trafficking, or as we call it in Spanish, narcotráfico. This particular change that was introduced to the law in 2009 was sold to the public as an idea of decriminalizing consumption, because it introduced a system, a threshold system that distinguished small amount for personal use, meaning that people in Mexico, for example, cannot be sent to jail for possessing up to 5 grams of cannabis or half a gram of cocaine, for example. But what it did in reality was to say that these particular conducts, even if committed with very small amounts of drugs, were also punishable with prison if the quantities of drugs were above the table that was set for personal immediate use. So now a person can be in prison up to 6 years if he or she is found in possession of cannabis, for example, of 6 grams of cannabis, and it's charged with possession with intention to supply other people. And of course, the time criminals can go to jail for up to 25 years, but they usually don't go to jail because the other consequence of this particular policy that we've been following is that we arrest drug users, but we don't touch the structures of the real criminal organizations that are making a lot of money with illegal trafficking. So I will just divide my presentation in 4 types of impacts that the drug war has had in Mexico, and I will start with the most evident, which is the impact on human rights. As you may be familiar with these numbers, Mexico has a record of homicides and has reached a record of homicides in a very short time. So we went from being a relatively country that only had 8 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants to a very violent country that now counts for up to 21 homicides 100,000 inhabitants. This means that in a decade, we triplicated our homicide rate, and at the same time, in the same period of time, we didn't manage to decrease the drug use prevalence, for example. So one of the indicators, or one of the main reasons that our government gave us, was that they were going to be really tough on drugs because they were going to prevent people from using drugs, and reality is that we've increased homicide violence, but we didn't touch the prevalences of youth. Estimates vary, but all in all, Mexico counts for over 100,000 people killed. There are some numbers that say that by the end of this administration, that will end in 2018, we will reach the record number of 250,000 people killed, and around those, 90,000 probably directly linked to the drug war. We also count for 27,000 people disappeared that we absolutely don't know where they are. We're becoming a country of mass graves. Only continues to found yet not mass grave after the other, without really having a policy to investigate those crimes and to restore some justice to the victims and their families. We also count for 281,000 people internally displaced because of violence and persecution, and we count for over 9,000 people who have been arbitrarily detained because we're using, and we will see this in a few minutes, more and more the criminal justice system to deal with a public health issue. So one of the indicators that we've been using to measure the impacts on human rights of this particular policy is the lethality index. It's a number that I'm very sure that you're familiar with, that counts the number of people killed in a raid where the police forces or the military participated, divided by the number of people injured in the same raid. So the numbers in Mexico are quite shocking, actually are very disturbing, because we count for more people killed than people injured in every single raid run by the federal forces. And we reach absolutely unacceptable numbers, for example, of 36 people killed per injured, or fatality rates of 36 when the Navy is involved in these particular operations. Why is this important? Because these rates were also calculated in wars, in open conflicts, and are useful, for example, for the international humanitarian law system to be activated when a war is declared or open conflict is identified, to start legal measures to protect the people that are living in a context of war. And in the case of Mexico, for example, this hasn't been possible because the government refuses to accept that we're pretty much in a civil war. We have worse fatality numbers than the Vietnam War. We have worse fatality rates than the war in Lebanon, than the war in Afghanistan. So you can imagine how terrible this has been, and the social costs that are associated with living in such violent contexts, particularly for the younger. Children are growing up, an entire generation of children are growing up now in these particular ambience in which violence is so normalized that they just perceive it as business as usual, and nobody's really horrified about these atrocities that are being committed in the country in the name of drugs. Other serious human rights violations includes, for example, the use of torture or other punishment methods when people are arrested. So just to give you one number, before December 2006, when we hadn't declared the war on drugs, the police forces, when detaining a person, used to use electroshocks in like 6% of the reported cases. After the declaration of the war on drugs, this number has increased to 44.86% in the number of detainees arrested for drug offenses. So you can see that the drugs discourse is authorizing a series of very important human rights violations that, of course, go against the Constitution and against the international standards on human rights. We've also increased the population for prisons. We also contribute to the overcrowding for prisons, and we've just increased the number of people that had been arrested for drug offenses without, again, touching the structures of organized crime dedicated to the production and illicit trafficking of these substances, and without touching the use numbers in the regular population, or even without decreasing the number of addicted people to all drugs. Just so you know, from 2006 to 2014, over 500,000 people were arrested for what we call in Mexico crimes against public health, being drug offenses. And for these, 150,000 were arrested just for consumption, even when in Mexican law, consumption is not a penal offense. So that means that 73% of all people federally detained, because probably know Mexico is a federal republic, so we have the federal government and the state's government. 73% of all the people the federation arrested were arrested for drug-related offenses, and most of them were possessors or consumers of illicit substances. Now, I don't need to tell you the circumstances and the conditions in which incarcerated people in Mexico live. I'm sure you can imagine that health services in prisons are not equally good, even accessible as they are outside prisons. And in the particular case, drug use and drug use related disorders, even outside prisons, Mexico has a very weak public system to actually deal with this. I will go much faster because I'm sure it's going to be more interesting for you to ask questions. But I just want to give you some numbers on consumption and on public health, so you can dimension how ineffective this policy has been, and you can also realize how the government has been using drug menace discourse as a political tool to actually authorize a series of reforms that they wanted to pass and that would not otherwise have passed if the population wouldn't have been in this psychosis state that we are now, after being told for 10 years that drugs are the worst and are tearing our country apart. So basically, Mexico has a consumption rate in global population from 12 to 65 years old of just 1.5%. In the prevalence in the previous year use is 1.8%, and it only has increased in 0.2% that the numbers that we had in 2008. So really, you can see we don't have many people using illegal drugs, and that the number of people addicted is relatively low for a country of 130 million people. The number of total people addicted to all illegal drugs, including cannabis, methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, you name it, it's only 550,000 people, again, in a country of 130 million people. So these just say, beware of the creation of these very strong menaces, because most of the times don't have such a big a problem when it comes to drug consumption. And if you do, as it might be the case of the Philippines, you may have higher rates of use. The indiscriminated use of the criminal justice system to deal with this only leads in more suffering and less trust of people who use drugs in the public institutions that are supposedly there to help them. Also, what we measure is really important. The Mexican government only has 3 ways of measuring use prevalence among the population. And there are basically 3 questions. Have you ever in your life used drugs? Have you used drugs in the past year? And have you used drugs in the past month? So if you ask people in Mexico whether they have used cannabis once in their lifetime, the percentage of users is relatively high, 6%. But if you ask the same people if they have used cannabis in the past year or the past month, the rates go below 1%. You really see that the total number of active people that are using drugs is really, really low. And compared to other causes of death for different diseases, drug use is really non-significant at all in terms of a public health perspective. We've only had, in one specific year, 2015, for example, only 70 deaths related to illicit drug use, whereas we had over 87,000 deaths related to diabetes. So you can see really that was not necessarily a problem. Violence was in control before they declared this war on drugs. And if you go through the numbers of public polls measuring trust and confidence people have on public institutions, including the police, including judges, including attorneys, Attorney General's office, including the military, so on and so forth, you will see that over the past decade, which coincides with the number of years that we've been fighting this war, the trust of the people had significantly decreased, including trust they have in the military, which was the most respectful institution in the country. So what are we doing in terms of civil society providing recommendations for the government in Mexico? Basically, what we're doing is trying to work with them in the definition of a new set of indicators. There are several projects going on in public universities trying to define the public problem of drugs in Mexico to really tailor the response to the national context. And by changing the metrics we're using to measure success, we're hoping that the country can actually turn this war on drugs around and create a more human, public health-oriented policy. What we're also doing is to support a series of initiatives to provide alternatives to incarceration and to better address, for example, the specific needs of women that have been incarcerated for drug offenses. Through those projects, we're working with a series of ministries here in the country to listen to the human stories, to listen to the suffering of the people, the reasons why they're using drugs, and the reasons why they have not seen either recovery, treatment, or addiction services. And we're trying to sensitize decision makers, but also public health services and providers, services coordinators, providers, and workers to have a better and more human rights approach to these people. We're also recommending a series of alternative policies, such as effective decriminalization of drug use and drug possession. So people that are using can be treated through the public health system and not through the criminal justice system. And so the criminal conducts that will remain, of course, in our law that are more related to traffic and that are more related to incitation to violence, can be really punished within the standards, of course, for example, of due process and other international rules. And lastly, what we're also promoting is the adoption of a legal regulation system, particularly for those substances that are used the most. Just very recently, last Friday, our Congress adopted a new law to allow for the use of medical cannabis. So we will be working in the next couple of months to try to get regulation right. And so eventually, once we have this system running, we can also go for an effective decriminalization bill that could release up to 10,000 people from prisons and direct them to the public health system if they are in need of treatment. We're also escalating harm reduction services, particularly in the northern border, where we have all this mobile population coming back and forth from the United States. And now that we have a different relationship with our neighbor and a lot of people are returning with patterns of problematic use, we're trying to even establish safe consumption sites of people that are using opiates and other injectable drugs. So that's pretty much the experience. I guess that the only aim of sharing this story with you is to try to help you avoid not committing the same mistakes you did. It's been very difficult to turn this around because, of course, all the consequences that I didn't mention is that this is affecting, for example, the way in which police forces are being are operating now on the ground. People are getting to jail more and more because they were arrested in flagrants instead of having police forces that are trained and are oriented to investigate more serious crimes. They're just taking kids out of the streets and putting them in jail with absolutely no possibility of getting out. And our prisons in Mexico are really universities of crime. So once you're in there, either you are also victimized inside the prison, or you're invited to just engage in other criminal activities that you otherwise wouldn't be involved with. So I'm pretty much here to listen to your concerns. I know that this has been a very general introduction to what we've been doing. Trust me, it has taken a lot of years and a lot of time and a lot of organizations all across the country to get the political will back on track, to start, for example, looking for all of these 27,000 people missing that disappeared, to try to identify the bodies of these graves we keep finding day after day, to try to even to bring the technology that the governments don't have to identify the human remains that we continue to find every single day. We're trying really hard. We also, in this period of sessions in Congress, we passed the first torture law to really punish this behavior from particulars, but also from state actors. We also enacted the law of enforced disappearance that we didn't have before. And so we've been working really to revert negative consequences of a policy that really enable public actors to behave like criminals, that created a lot of negative, unintended, if you want, consequences that are now becoming real problems for all of us. And really to try, again, to destigmatize drug use, destigmatize drug users, because this narrative is also very powerful in trying to create a public enemy the entire society will dismiss and will hate. So people who use drugs in Mexico are now being seen more and more as people in need of help, as people in need of treatment, just as people with diabetes or other diseases are in need of that support. And we're trying really hard to get the public services right. That's one of our pending battles. We're working on different groups to create the standards for science-based treatment, trying to get people to relapse that many times if they really want to complain, and if they can't or they won't, to get them closer to the harm reduction services that they need, so they can also protect their health and the health of their loved ones, in order to prevent the transmission of the disease. So this particular policy, and just to give you the last example, has been also disastrous in terms of health, because, for example, in Mexico, even if we have very little people injecting drugs, in focus, namely in 3 cities of the northern states, around 17,000 people injecting, 97% of them are hepatitis positive, with absolutely no access to treatment, with absolutely no access to tests, and evidently no access to clean paraphernalia that will allow them not to continue spreading the disease. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to be here for a little while longer to try to respond to your questions if you have. And I really wish that after this opportunity that you had, you're going to be able to build and design your drug policies for the good of your own people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanchez, for giving us a clear picture on how Mexico actually approached the drug war, and that it is very clear that the punitive approach is not the way forward, but rather that it is the public health approach, and that it's very encouraging to note that there are efforts towards that direction. And so we now open our forum for questions. May we request that you make your questions short and sweet to give more participants the chance to ask questions. So can we have the first question, please?
Thank you.
Cecilia Noble from Philippine Public Safety College. My question is, can you elaborate on how do you destigmatize drug users, as you mentioned? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble listening to the question. Can somebody repeat those on the microphone?
How do you destigmatize drug users? You mentioned that that's one of your interventions. Destigmatization.
Yes, all right. Sorry, well, if I understood the question correctly, is how are we doing to destigmatize people who use drugs, and to kind of dismantle this narrative of people who use drugs being people or criminals? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's her question.
Okay, so the first effort, we did was to share with the government the human stories behind the numbers, because it's very easy for people to start hating collectivity of people that are not identified as individuals with families, with problems, or even individuals that are highly functional in society, and are just hidden in all of these numbers you will see on television of these many kilos of cannabis being destroyed, or these many people being put into jail because of terrible, horrible crimes they had committed, which most of the cases were just to use illegal substances. We've produced a campaign, a series of videos. For example, now we've recently launched the last set of a campaign that's called Anyone's Child, that was also launched in the United Kingdom, to really prove people who use drugs are really in need of more information, more education, more support, and not punishment. And that proved being really helpful to change the mentality of other people that used to think of drug users as the worst of society and just a horrible load that we had to carry collectively just because they decided to use drugs. And the other thing that worked really well was to also show all of these stories of the people that are using drugs, not because they want to get high, but because they really need them, either as a palliative alternative or as a therapeutical alternative. So there have been mothers sharing their stories saying, I committed a crime because I cultivated this plant because my daughter has this or that disease, and the government wouldn't allow me to do it legally. That was another thing, but also a series of trainings really with behind closed doors with government officials, in which we were showing the results of qualitative and quantitative studies saying people that are using drugs in Mexico are not really becoming addicted to drugs. 90% of them will have a very functional relation to these substances, and they will stop by themselves using them at some point. And the other percentage of people that will develop some problems related to their use, what they really need is for services to be included in the Social Security package, for example. So Mexico just included very recently detoxification services into the public health insurance policy. Like 2 or 3 years before then, people couldn't go to a public hospital to get detox and really join a treatment program because it wasn't included in the services that the state provide. So through the sensitization of these public servants that we've been advancing this, and it also applies, for example, to the availability of opiates in the country that are legally regulated as medicines, and we just didn't have them because stigma was so strong against physicians prescribing these substances that they weren't doing it.
Okay, are there other questions from the floor? Anyone? Or, share your comments or insights, but very briefly. So I guess that's just about it. So may we give Ms. Sanchez again another round of applause to show our appreciation. Thank you, Ms. Lisa Sanchez. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so how do we go about this? We are supposed to give Ms. Lisa Sanchez our token gift of appreciation, so probably we'll just find a way how to go about that some other day. Okay, thank you again.